If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. The problem was that the Pharisees had enough knowledge to know who God was, but not enough knowledge to recognize that Jesus, that God was standing right in front of them. They had enough knowledge, but not to recognize who Jesus was. And therefore, Jesus says, you're blind. Oftentimes, I believe this is an unbelievable message for modern North American church. I wish I had an entire time to just go into this small little passage because it is so tasty, it's so rich, it's so deep, there's so much theology in here. But the reality is, we need to move on. But here's the deal. Because you think you know you're blind, because you think that you know the right things and the right things to do at the right times for the right reasons, because you think that your behavior gets you to God, because you think that your good works makes you right in God's eyes, you're blind. You're blind over and over. The Pharisees think that they know, and they think that they're doing right. And the entire time they're missing Jesus, the coming Messiah, the one that they were in charge of making Israel pure and waiting for thousands of years, standing right there, and they miss him. All the way to the point that they eventually kill him. Modern North American church, modern North American Christianity. I wonder if we know all the right things, but lack the ability to recognize Jesus. I wonder if we know all the right things, if we've been in church our entire lives. I wonder if we know all the right passages, and we know all the right answers, and we know all the right things to say to the right people at the specific times for whatever they're experiencing in their life, whether good or bad. But yet in our own life, we lack the ability to recognize Jesus in our own life. This is what Jesus called the Pharisees out on. And he likens them to the bad shepherds and to the non-shepherds of Ezekiel chapter 34. John chapter 10. There's no way we're going through all this. Awesome. John chapter 10, verse 1. I tell you the truth. The man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. What is Jesus doing here? First off, I taught you the difference between preaching and teaching last week. This is a podcast if you want to jump in. The reality is this: Jesus is not interested in handing out information. If you were following Jesus, you weren't going to get a formula. You weren't going to get a pat answer. You weren't going to get a cliche. Jesus was not interested in handing out information. Jesus was interested in opening the imaginations of his followers so that they could see the multi-dimensional living truth that is Jesus standing right in front of them. The reason the Pharisees were blind is because they weren't willing to open their imaginations and to see God literally standing there in front of them. So Jesus is opening the imaginations, not handing out information, not giving formulas, not giving recipes, not giving cliches, not giving pat answers. But instead, Jesus is interested in life. He's interested in giving them the depth and the reality. He's interested in them recognizing that he is the good shepherd, that he will provide, that he is the way, that he is the protector, that he is the passageway. Jesus, brilliantly as a master communicator, is opening the imaginations of his followers. Opening the imaginations and inviting them onto a journey. He's not doing the learning for them. He's not saying, recite this, regurgitate this, and you're in. He's not interested. He's interested in them growing in intimacy to find out that he really is who he says he is. And he's interested in people putting their complete surrender and complete trust in Jesus. Because trust isn't the assent of knowledge. It's not the assent of knowledge. It's not the assent of information. Trust is the attachment to trust. Belief is the attachment to trust. He's interested in getting people to understand what it means to believe by attaching them to trust the shepherd. If you were a first century Jewish listener, you would have known this metaphor. Because Jesus uses everyday reality, everyday life to communicate deep truths. in Scripture. So here's the scene. The scene is a village. There's kind of two thoughts historians believe and theologians believe, scholars believe in this text. There's kind of two thoughts. The first thought that they believe, potentially in a village, is that every single house would have had a, quote-unquote, what you see, sheep pen. Every house would have had a sheep pen. More appropriately, would probably be called a courtyard. So every house had sheep. Because remember the deep worth of sheep. So the more sheep you have, the more wealth you have, the more wealth you work. And so every house has a sheep pen, has a courtyard that the sheep would stay in. But really, most scholars believe that each village, although that is accurate, specifically what Jesus is talking in the context here, is that each village had one specific courtyard. That every single family, every single household, whether you had 2 sheep, whether you had 300 sheep, would all be put in this one courtyard overnight. The scene is specifically that. All the sheep from all the different all the different houses and families in the village have put their sheep in the sheep pen. So Jesus says, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate or climbs in by some other ways, a robber and a thief. So the shepherd in the morning would come to the gate, and at the gate there would be a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper would recognize the shepherd, and then he would allow the sheep to come out as the shepherd would call them. The sheep recognize his voice, and the gatekeeper allows the sheep to come out and follow the specific shepherd. Now, over and over in Scriptures, we see flocks intermixing. We see flocks intermixing, whether it's in a courtyard or a sheep pen, or whether it's in a pasture, because the pasture there's only a finite number of pastures that had water. And so a lot of the shepherds would pasture their same sheep in the same pastures to allow them to graze and allow them to get the water that's sufficient for what they need. And then the shepherd would call them by name or have a specific call or a specific whistle or something. And the sheep who knew that shepherd would leave while the other sheep would stay because that was not their shepherd. A brilliant picture here. He's saying they enter the sheep pen by the gates. This is the normal affairs of a shepherd. If you were a shepherd, this is what you would normally do. This is what you would rightfully do. There's nothing that's under the radar. There's nothing that's subversive. There's nothing that's forced. They would come in, the gatekeeper would recognize them, and he would allow the sheep to leave. But if you entered some other way, it was subversive. It was not through the gate. It was forced. It was not right. If you entered some other way, you had selfish ambitions. There were selfish motives for you not entering through the appropriate way that you should enter, or that one ought enter. And so, again, he's given the picture that someone who is not a shepherd lives and guides their sheep by selfish motives. This is exactly what Ezekiel was calling the leadership out back in the Old Testament. Because they were selfish. They were taking care of themselves. They were using the tithes and offerings to adorn themselves. They were using the people and their estates after they passed away to accumulate more and more and more. They were corrupt. This is the same exact picture. Verse 2, the man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. Verse 3, the watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Good shepherds, if you're a shepherd, again, or not shepherds, shepherds always led their sheep. They always stood in front of their sheep. They were never on the side, and the sheep would get agitated. They would get anxious. They were never behind them because they didn't like to be pushed, because they're defenseless. They're aimless wanderers. If someone's not out leading, they don't know where to go. A good shepherd always leads them out, leads them to where? The point of a shepherd is to lead them to a pasture. The point of a shepherd is to lead them to the appropriate place to get the nutrients. The point of a shepherd is to keep them alive and to grow them into healthy, mature sheep, to reproduce, to continue the flock, to get bigger, to get more money, to become more wealthy, to have more worth. And it was the shepherd's job. Verse 4, when he has brought them all out, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. This is a picture of trust. This is a picture of trust over and over and over again. This is a picture of trust. Again, belief is the attachment to trust. Belief isn't the assent of knowledge. It's not the intellectual assent or the assent of knowledge as the Pharisees had, but it's the attachment to trust. Shepherds trust their sheep, trust their shepherd, because they have led them over and over and over again to the pasture, to the place to get water, to provide everything that they need. Verse 5, they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice.